was actually the first country that gave legal personhood to a river. This is the Wanganui River, which is now considered a legal entity. Yeah, so just like people became, even women, not too long ago, became legally representing themselves, or slaves, not too long ago. Companies then became legal personalities, and now we're starting to give legal personhood to rivers. That means we have to take them into account as whole systems. And then number 17, partnerships for the SDGs. And I'll talk a little bit later about the SDG summit that I convened recently. So, any questions so far? No? All good? In terms of the SDG framework, I often get the question, who does not get the question, what is sustainability? What do you mean with sustainability? You see, yeah, I've seen some nodding heads. It's when I first came to Victoria University, I got that question a lot. And it's, do you mean energy reduction? Do you mean recycling? What is it you mean? And I actually think the fact that we live with 7.5 billion people on a finite planet and growing to 10, with declining supply of resources, but an increasing demand for those resources, makes it so that we have to transition. And here we are now, Agenda 2030. So that's an agenda that sits in the future. For the first time, all countries have now agreed on what those goals are. They are specific, we can talk about it, and they apply to everyone. Yeah? You probably also recognize in this the funnel from The Natural Step, right? Another Swedish invention. So this is not a new concept, but it is an opportunity that resonates visually. It helps us to create a common language, and it certainly provides us with a means to create commitment and to set real clear targets that we can work towards. As an ecological economist, it's nothing new. You see there the social, human, build, and natural capital, of course. I also want to point out that this is yet another opportunity to talk about strong and weak sustainability, because we often see that people start to pick and choose and sometimes focus on the social aspects. In fact, that's a question I asked your Swedish SDG coordinator recently. Why have you prioritized as a government the social ones? It was quite an interesting answer in that sense. The natural capital ones already have processes and aspects in place, so they are looking at the ones that they feel they're weak in, which I think is actually a pretty good way to go about how to use those SDGs and the SDG framing. So, in New Zealand, in 2016, the businesses represented by the Sustainable Business Council, on which I was on the advisory board for a while, prioritized these three. Nothing really surprising there. The government, pretty much the same, was a more business-oriented government. And citizens prioritized no poverty, good health and education. But then fast forward to 2018, and you see that the businesses are starting to really come on board. In fact, I've added renewable energy and life below water, because those were two very strong businesses behind the summit that we recently ran. We now have a prime minister who rattles off the concepts between at least 9 of those SDGs in almost any sentence that she uses on what's important for New Zealand. And not only that, citizens got interviewed, and we now have 28% of the population at least recognizing these SDGs. So that's pretty cool. We're moving in the right direction. Now we can prioritize these things. We can prioritize the things we are already good in. Or as like Sweden, we can prioritize the things we may be not so good at. But I want to really think about, and I think you're doing that here very, very powerfully, think about these SDGs as an organizing principle, that in the end they're all interconnected. So it doesn't really matter where you start. If I'm interested in life below water, number 14, those have connections everywhere, and you might need those different competencies. So the more we start using the SDG framing, the SDG language, the more we start to see the opportunities for working together in a more transdisciplinary way. So again, this provides a common language, a framework to see where's your entry point and how much reach does one have within that framing. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk more about that in a bit. So now we have the goals, right? How are we going to finance that? Well, people often wonder about what's going to cost us if we're now finally going to do this SDG pathway. Delivering that is estimated $2 to $3 trillion US dollars. Sounds like a lot, but if you really look at it, it's only 4% of global GDP. I mean, would we give 4% of our income in order to achieve those SDGs? The problem is, though, the cost of not delivering on those SDGs is far bigger. And then, of course, achieving this could unlock a whole lot of innovation and new opportunities, including for universities, to the tune of much more per year. Yep, so we have to shift our thinking as businesses, as universities, as societies from cost focus to a value focus. What's the value of all this? And again, the SDGs give us that framework to define value much better. The question is, of course, for whom? Right? Because we got different sectors in society there. Now we get to the guide. Universities are critical in achieving those SDGs. We know that. We are the knowledge centers, we are learning, we are hopefully creating ways to demonstrate impact. So just some of those things, how can SDGs help universities? They can ignite a passion. Young people are often very passionate about these things, and they're looking for ways to not only do things practically, but also we need to help them upscale and have that larger impact. I think it helps us to synchronize languages in different areas of expertise. When people start talking, as you probably know, you have a lot more in common than you originally think, and there are processes that we can use to get people to talk in that way. Impact framework, I've just learned that you already have something like that in place. And they are concrete and therefore become fundable. Right? So these pathways lead to fundable propositions. And they provide an infrastructure for collaboration. And I think those are some of the tasks that universities can provide. So how can universities then help achieve those SDGs? Well, safe spaces for partnerships. We are already good at creating laboratories, social and natural science type of laboratories, incubators, helping the seeds grow further, and then, of course, disseminate that information as fast as we possibly can. Okay, are we with the program here? Yes? We're doing good? The domains for SDG application. So these are kind of the standard ways of looking at research, education, operations, and governance and leadership. This is very much the New Zealand, Australian way of looking at this. But I've just learned that here you have a slightly different version of that, and we could talk about in the discussion perhaps about what the pros and the cons are. I do like the checklists on the side of what you could possibly think of as you're developing these programs. So, getting started. Here's the guide with the 5 steps, and I was thinking I would just go briefly over them and describe a little bit what I have done during my, reflect a bit on my time as ABC Sustainability. So the first one is map what you already are doing. We started scrubbing the systems for SDG relevant content and found that 11% of all courses, about 3,000 of them, pertain directly to the SDGs. So then we started to look at how does it look at per faculty and, of course, per program. And you get some interesting understanding about what each of these faculties and each of these programs are doing. Then I commissioned a piece of research, and Gothenburg University was part of that in the end, of what other universities are doing. I was interested about how could we further develop this sustainability curriculum. And so, of course, the bottom level is promote the programs and the courses that you already are doing. A little bit, the next step up would be to start looking at university-wide courses, maybe an introductory course that can be taken by anyone in the entire university. Or develop that interdisciplinary infrastructure, and that's where I think this unit, GMV, is a bit of an envy in the space. Step 2, build the capacity. So what I did was a big survey, cultural sustainability culture survey with all staff and all students. And that one showed that 98% of all students thought that sustainability was important or very important. Now that's great leverage to start putting more emphasis on the space of sustainability. Internally, Victoria had started with interdisciplinary research teams, one on sustainability. And in order to get the conversation going constructively, we decided to create an ideation forum, which was involved all faculties plus external stakeholders, and gave an infrastructure for people to create clusters of ideas. And then they could submit within one day a project idea, and we had money that we could allocate to those project ideas very quickly and efficiently. So it was really just to seed those ideas. Some worked very well. Some made out of their, what was it, 25,000 kroner, they made a lot more. And others sort of just did what they did. But it was just the infrastructure. If you want to look at that, there is a YouTube video that describes that process a bit. I also started to run workshops with schools and people to talk about what are those SDGs and how are you already doing this and how can you amplify what you already are doing more. And then externally, I convened the first summit on the SDGs, which was very cross-sectoral with all universities involved. Well, some. The first one in Wellington. Next year we'll have one in Auckland, and then hopefully Dunedin. And I was going to show you this, the video of this summit. There it comes.
Is that people will become more informed about what these SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are, get excited about the potential of working together toward a global agenda for 2030, and mobilize here in New Zealand.
The only way we will succeed in achieving the SDGs is through collaboration and collectiveness. Each of the 17 goals affects each and every one of us, no matter what our background, our interests, or where we sit in society.
The Indigenous peoples should speak for and represent themselves before the world community.
So our relationship to the environment has to be conceived as one, as a whole. This is because our land and our water are indivisible.
How do we provide food for 10 billion people in the world by mid-century? The Sustainable Development Goals will not be achieved without universities and the higher education sector. I'm an independent watchdog, and my bark today would be, tell us what the plan is for moving us forward.
A date I need for when New Zealand's going to submit its first voluntary national review.
The government has yet to make a decision on when it's going to do it, but it's likely to be in 2019.
I know that a number of you are keen to know more where in the structure of government responsibility will lie for the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a massive program of work, and it is early days, but we are up for it.
The groundswell of the conversation is different now than what it was 20, 30 years ago. Those who had the voice back then are not the same people who have it now.
Grassroots bottom level are the young people, and so it's really important that they're initiated in these conversations now.
Up there are 3 action stations vying to win a $2,000 voucher.
The issues that the SDGs that's happening are really intertwined with our business success in the long term. So if we are going to be a successful business, we need to be addressing all of these issues, otherwise they're going to impact on us.
The Sustainable Development Goals and broader measures allow us to really focus our efforts, but they in and of themselves won't be successful unless we actually come together in an integrated way to plan actions.
I think what today has really affirmed for me is how important this idea of positive storytelling around the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly for businesses, how we help businesses tell their good stories is a really critical part of the work we all need to keep doing.
I think today what I've learned is really the value of collaboration and partnership, and how important that's going to be for us as a business to really move to the next stage with the work that we're doing ourselves.
So this waka over here holds the kōrero of today and will carry it to Auckland for the 2019 summit, where the conversation will continue.
If you have your airplanes with your ideas, we will gather them, these ideas, and put them together as part of the report that we're hoping to get out after this.
All right. That was a really fun part of it. I can tell you that. So, how do I get back to my PowerPoint now? Do I close it?
No, you just need to click next.
Are you sure? I just did that.
Okay, then escape.
Maybe if I go here. Ah, there we go. There. All right. So step number 3. So that was very much about engagement and all that, bringing people together. Also, I would say externally, because if you get the external partners to say, hey, this is really important, and we want to, as businesses, want to create partnerships with you as a university, that's a really powerful way to continue with. Step 3, identify priorities, opportunities and gaps. I did that through really trying to commit us to the SDG framing. Very practically, there was a step toward carbon neutrality, because the university was really good at it already. I already talked about the sustainability curriculum, and then changing that culture from, sustainability is about recycling and all that. Yes, it's that too. And we need to change that whole culture. I won't go over all this, but if you develop a business case, there's lots of things, lots of information in the guide of what you can think about to make that business case. Sometimes it's good to be reminded of that. Step number 4, integrate, implement and embed. It's really a juggling act between those 4 domains. Multiple agents. I really looked for the willing people that I think you have too, in about 500, a database of about 500 people. That's again enviable. I think I only had 150, 200. Of course the students, very powerful. And are you going to use social learning only, or are you going to also focus on change agency? And there's actually some tension. If there's any social scientists in the room here, you'll know that there is some decisions to be made there. Step number 5, monitor, evaluate, and communicate. Well, this was, under my tenure, the first public sustainability report. Before that, it had been internal environmental reports that we organized along the lines of the SDGs, just to prep that conversation. And if it would have been my wish, it would follow through all the way to integrated reporting for this organization. Working with the SDGs, well, if you do that, you can just do better, use them to map and do better what you are already currently doing. So then map and prioritize. Or you can use this as a way to frame things and focus on the interlinkages, right? And then it is more looking for those synergies between what you're already doing and where the big gaps are. Or finally, you can use them to say, are we actually asking the right questions? And fundamentally shift the paradigm. So you see systems thinking at the bottom of all this. Lessons learned, I won't go spend a whole lot of time on that. We can talk about that after a drink. I think the guide was very useful. Actually, we wrote it, and afterwards I looked at it and says, actually, it is a nice checklist. And it's wonderful to see that it is now interpreted in all kinds of international contexts. And I think that's important. It's a living document. Again, the SDGs provide a common language. So we need to give it the space for people to be able to translate how they understand their contributions and their language, to align that with the SDGs. The domains, I actually like the way you guys are working with it. I think the segregation is a bit problematic. There's always a balance between, are we going to take concrete action now because it's nice and visible and tangible, versus how are we going to change systemically the infrastructure that allows that. So, and I think there's quite a tension between those two extremes. You need both. So to maintain a creative tension between the systems change and the concrete action is going to be that awesome little sweet spot. And that depends, is different for every situation, really. I think sustainability and the SDGs are everyone's business, not just for the government to write a nice report. And pick the battles carefully, because you can't do everything. There's a tendency that it becomes SDG or sustainability creep. And it's not concrete, and therefore does not allow for it to take that next step. And with that, I pretty much like to end. How did I do? 3 minutes over time.